no, oh, sorry. We're streaming. Everything is successful.
Okay, we're ready to go?
We're live.
Yeah.
All right. This is going to be a talk about land value taxes in Pittsburgh and how that affects housing supply and affordability. I'm Jack Billings. It's February 19th. Next slide, Vlad. Cool. All right, so why this matters. We have a housing crisis, not just in Pittsburgh, but generally. The solution to this housing crisis is that we need to build more housing. Housing prices are a function of supply and demand, specifically localized supply and demand. It doesn't matter if you build a lot of housing out in Cranberry when the demand's really high in Squirrel Hill. Part of building more housing is regulatory changes, right? So getting rid of parking minimums, getting rid of minimum lot sizes, zoning changes that reduce the number of setbacks or allow the number of units to increase the number of units per lot. All of that is important. But part of that is also incentives. And incentives, I mean financial incentives that the government can offer, either in the form of subsidies, the government paying to produce more housing in one form or another, or the other really big lever that local government has is taxes, how we choose to tax housing and how we choose to tax construction. And that's a much bigger lever than subsidies. We tax, a couple hundred times more than we pay out in subsidies. Okay, so the two main ways to pull this lever are, one, how property values are assessed, and two, how we choose to tax property. Next slide. And these are going to be very tightly tied together. So the two main issues are that we tax buildings and new construction, and that constrains housing supply. The construction of new buildings, that is something that is elastic. The more you tax it, the less you get of it. And since housing prices are a function of supply and demand, the more you tax housing and thus the less housing that gets built, the more expensive housing is and the less housing there is. The other issue is that our assessments are far too low for higher value properties. And this is because, and we'll get into the history of why this is in Pittsburgh specifically, but we have very low assessments for high value properties, which means that our tax rates are higher than they should be, and two, those tax rates are borne largely by new construction and largely by properties that have been assessed relatively recently, so people who have recently moved into the city. And this means that it, one, constrains the supply of housing because it decreases the amount of new construction. That pushes up rents specifically, so a lot of that tax burden falls on renters. It falls on new households to the city, whether they are home buyers or renters. And since those tend to be younger and have built up less household wealth, they tend to be poor. So our lack of regular assessments and our poor assessments that we currently have essentially pushes taxes regressively onto the poor in our society. So we have two main recommendations that are going to come out of this. One is we ought to implement a land value tax, specifically where we tax the value of land, not land plus the improvements on top of it. The reason that we want this, and we'll go into detail, is because the supply of land is fixed. You tax land, that doesn't create or destroy it, so that doesn't change the supply of housing in one direction or the other. And that means that the incidence of it falls directly on the landowner. It can't be passed on to renters. The other main recommendation is that we should reassess property values on a regular basis, regular, frequent, fair assessments using open source data, open source methods that accurately assess land value and accurately assess property value, and that reflect their fair market values. Next slide, please. All right, and so the key points, you can leave after this slide and you'll have gotten everything. Land value tax. It's a property tax where you tax the value of the land, not the building that sits on top of the land. If you're taxing both land and building value, but you're doing it at separate rates, this is called a split rate tax. This is something that Pittsburgh used to do from 1914 to 2001. And it was a good thing that when we did it. We taxed land at a higher rate than we taxed buildings. And relative to a conventional flat property tax, land value taxes and split rate taxes, they incentivize construction and they discourage blight and land speculation, and that increases the supply of housing that pushes down rents. So the policy recommendation, bring back the split rate tax or land value tax, along with frequent, regular, fair tax assessments, but we should phase in the tax change slowly over the course of several years, not do one big change all at once to avoid a major political backlash. All right, next slide. So this is from the 2024 Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, and this is just the tax revenue that Pittsburgh received in 2024 and 2023. I've highlighted real estate property taxes and deed transfer taxes. These are the two ways that we are taxing property at the moment. And you can see that it's about $200 million a year, which is about 1/3 of the $600 million that the city of Pittsburgh collects in taxes every year. Next slide, please. And this is the past 10 years of that, with the numbers a little bit more precise. Same thing. It was approximately 1/3 of our tax revenue is coming from deed transfer taxes, real estate transfer taxes. So when you buy a property or sell a property, you pay a tax right at that moment. And real estate property taxes, the tax on the assessed value of the land and building. Next slide. City taxes land and buildings at the same unified rate. They plan to maintain that unified rate unless land values are reassessed in the future. So part of the reason why we are pushing for reassessments, not just because reassessments are just a good thing generally, is because it's going to be very hard to convince city government to go back to a split rate tax or to adopt a land value tax or to really make any changes on property taxes whatsoever until the county assessment problem is solved. Next slide. How do we tax in Pittsburgh? All right, so if you buy a house in Pittsburgh and you buy it this year in 2025, the first thing you will be hit with is a real estate transfer tax. So if you buy a house for, let's say, $500,000, 5% of that is going to, $25,000 is going to be paid in taxes immediately, half by you, the buyer, half by the seller, but you know, we know from economics that it doesn't really matter how they choose to assign it. That doesn't actually affect the incidence of the tax. 1% of that goes to the school district, 3% to the city of Pittsburgh, 1% to the state. The 3% to the city of Pittsburgh is something the city of Pittsburgh can and should change and should get down to 0. Once you own the property, every year you pay, based on the assessed value of the property, property taxes. Right now it's a unified rate. So despite the fact that your assessment will say a different number for land and building value, the total value of it will be paid. You'll pay tax on it. Millage, that's dollars paid per $1,000 in assessed value. Allegheny County's current millage rate, 6.43. Rest you can see here. The total is about 27 mills, so you're paying about 2.7% of your assessed property value in taxes. Except if you get some exemptions. If you get the homestead exemption, if you are an owner-occupier who lives in your house and you get a homestead exemption, you get an exemption from Allegheny County, a different one from the city of Pittsburgh, different one from the school district. This was implemented in 2001 following our repeal of the split rate tax. And in general, and it comes directly off of building value, not land value. And it is also objectively a little bit of a bad thing because you're effectively taxing homeowners at a lower rate than you're taxing renters. So you are, and it has a deadweight loss to it too. So what you are essentially doing.
How does this effectively tax renters?
The question is, how does this tax renters more than homeowners? Okay, so since it's an exemption on building value, that means that if you build something and then you choose to rent it out, you don't choose to live in it, you don't get that exemption. So it is essentially a higher tax on buildings that get rented out. And if you put a higher tax on buildings that get rented out, that then decreases the number of buildings that get built to get rented out, that decreases the supply of rental housing, that pushes up rents, and so the tax gets passed on to renters through the form of higher rental prices. The incidence falls on renters. So what we are essentially doing when we do a homestead exemption is that we are charging a higher tax on renters. We are taking some of that revenue and we are setting it on fire in the form of deadweight loss. It's just gone forever. And then we are transferring what little remains to homeowners who are statistically many times wealthier than renters. So it is a poor life choice that we have made, but one of many in our tax policy. We have many other exemptions as well. We don't need to spend too much time getting into all of it right now.
Jack,
Yes.
sorry. But can you explain the deadweight loss thing a bit more? Like, why is that setting it on fire?
Sure. You know what? Deep in the appendix, I have some supply and demand graphs, which I had promised not to show. Okay. If we have time at the end, I will do a whole segue on deadweight loss. Next slide, please. Soon we'll get to pictures. Okay, so here are two houses. They are both in Pittsburgh. I put their addresses on there. They are, in most respects, very similar. They are both split-level ranches. They were both built mid-century. This one's 1954. This one's 1960, so this one's a little newer. This one's on a 9,000 square foot lot, 9,726. This one's on a slightly larger lot. This one is a little under 1,800 square feet. This one's a little over 1,900 square feet. 3 bedrooms, 3 baths each. In most respects, close to identical. One ever so slightly worse in most respects than the other, except one of them sold in 2020 for a little under $200,000, and the other sold in 2023 for $845,000. Does anyone have any guesses why one house sold for 4 times as much as the other? Yes.
One is in East Liberty, the other is in Stanton Heights.
You've got the right idea, different neighborhoods. Next slide, please. Yeah, land value is a function of location. One is in Bon Air, and one is in Squirrel Hill. Anyone want to guess which one's in Bon Air and which one's in Squirrel Hill? Right? Land value is a function of location. Next slide, please. Specifically, underlying land in Squirrel Hill is much more valuable than land in Bon Air because it's closer to city parks and museums, universities, cafes, restaurants, all of the amenities, everything that we build up in society that makes a place to live desirable is what gives land its value. It's not something that the person who owns the land has created. It is the rest of society creating it around it that gives it its value. So next slide, please. So here we have 2 parcels downtown. We've got this office building, 301 Grant Street, and then 1 block away, we've got this parking lot directly in front of the City County building at 401 Grant Street. They are both, this one is 1.79 acres, this one's 1.1 acres. Here are their current assessments according to the county. When I did this presentation a couple years ago, their land value was a little bit closer in value, and their building values were even larger in disparity. But one of the many issues that we have going on is that as the demand for downtown office space collapses, and as that brings down building values, that's actually crushing a lot of our revenue that's coming from taxes on buildings. And so one of the advantages of switching onto a land value tax is that we are more resilient to that specifically. But getting into land value, you'll notice that they have, one's $10 million in land value, the other is $5 million in land value. This one's only paying about $130,000 in taxes a year, this parking lot. This is paying $1.5 million in taxes per year. If we want there to be dense buildings in the city, if we want everything not to be parking lots and sprawl, then we should not be taxing parking lots at a lower rate than we're taxing skyscrapers downtown. Next slide, please. Because if we do a little bit of parking lot math, if you think it's 100 cars on a work day and they're paying $20 to park for the day, 50 weeks out of the year, 5 days a week, that's $500,000 in revenue. And if you're only paying $130,000 in property taxes, and you're only paying, I think it's like a third of this revenue in the parking tax that it is paid to the city, then you can sit on this piece of land indefinitely and hold out for the highest bidder as long as you want. And that's going to constrain new development. That's going to constrain new construction. That is going to mean that there is going to be less buildings built, which means less apartments and less homes being built, which is going to constrain the supply of housing and push up rents and housing prices. Next slide, please. So there is this great billboard from about 100 years ago. Everyone works but the vacant lot. I paid $3,600 for this lot and will hold till I get $6,000. The profit is unearned increment made possible by the presence of this community and enterprise of its people. I take the profit without earning it. For the remedy, read Henry George. Yours truly, Ray Lewis. Henry George was an economist and writer in the 19th century who wrote a very famous book called Progress and Poverty, where he argued very powerfully for the land value tax. His arguments for it is one of the reasons that Pittsburgh actually adopted it in 1913. And this billboard captures a lot of the issue, which is if you're taxing buildings and you're having a relatively low tax on land, you are encouraging land speculation. You are encouraging sprawl. You are encouraging holding land vacant and waiting until other people will bid it up, rather than trying to get as much built and as much housing out there as possible. Next slide.
It'd be cool to raise some cash to do this on Butler.
Right?
Across from Aston Mall.
Yeah. The other issue is that a property tax, a building tax subsidizes blight. Here are two buildings in Uptown on 5th Avenue, 1505 and 1507 5th Avenue. They are on the exact same square footage lot. They are buildings that are both built of brick, of almost exactly the same square footage. I think they were built in the same year. They are basically identical. One is owned by someone in New Jersey and is boarded up and vacant, and it is paying about a quarter in taxes what the one that is next door and is active and is being used. What we are effectively doing when we have a relatively high rate on building tax is that if you hold a piece of property and you let it become blighted and decayed and thus its assessed value goes down, then we are paying you to do that. We are taxing you less if you do that. We are essentially collecting money from this person and giving it to this person because this person made their building worse. And of course, holding this empty and vacant and not having it turned into apartments constrains the supply of housing, pushing rents up. Next slide, please. So buying a vacant lot or a decrepit building in an otherwise improving area, then waiting for other properties to improve, all while paying low taxes, is an easy way to have large investment gains with minimal risk. The investor who refuses to improve, but also refuses to sell their property, is a common frustration within neighborhoods. It's a direct byproduct of the property tax. That's Charles Marone, Chuck Marone, and you get what you tax for. For those of you who don't recognize the name, he is the founder of an organization called Strong Towns, which argues for a lot of zoning and property tax reforms, land value tax reforms. His stuff is worth reading. Next slide. Okay, now we get into assessments. So the way tax assessments work in Allegheny County is that we last did an assessment in 2012. And so all assessments in the county are, in theory, the market value of that building in 2012 dollars. And so that means that if your market value is $100,000, we currently multiply it by something called the common level ratio, and so your assessed value is $50,000. New construction is assessed on completion. The issue with this is that houses just frequently don't get reassessed. So a neighborhood that has seen a lot of rise in value since 2012 and might have houses that are still assessed at 2012 prices, while the new houses there or recently sold houses there have assessments that are many times higher. And then also new construction is assessed on completion, which essentially means that new construction, especially in high value areas, which is where we want to be building the most housing, is effectively assessed and taxed at a higher rate than the existing housing supply in the city. So we are taxing new housing specifically, and that is, again, constraining the housing supply, pushing up rents. And taxing bodies may challenge assessments of recently sold properties. So if you have just moved into the city of Pittsburgh and you just moved into Lawrenceville and you just purchased a house for $800,000 or $1 million, the school district is very likely to challenge your assessment, and you're going to get a surprise bill in the mail when you find out that you're paying taxes at a much higher rate than your neighbors. So next slide. Here are 3 neighbors in Lawrenceville. 272 Fisk Street, 270 Fisk Street, 268 Fisk Street. They are all on the exact same square foot lot. They are all size lot. They were all built in 1910. They all have, as far as I can tell, the exact same floor plan. One was last sold in 2009, one in 2025, one in 2022, $150,000, $1 million, $800,000. Their assessments, as you can see, are wildly different, and thus their taxes paid are wildly different. And what we are doing by not doing regular assessments, by only doing these sort of spot assessments when new people move in, is that we are, again, subsidizing this homeowner at the expense of these homeowners. We are subsidizing someone who holds an asset that is arguably as valuable as these 2 other assets, right? If he put this on the market next week, he'd probably be able to sell it for a price similar to what his 2 neighbors sold it. So he has an asset the same as these other 2 people, but just because he's been around for longer, he is paying a fourth in taxes, what they are doing. And this discourages mobility within the city. This discourages downsizing from a large home into a smaller home if your kids grow up and move out and go to college. It also discourages new families from moving into the city. If you want to have, if you're planning on having a couple kids and you want to buy a house, then you're going to be facing not only inflated property values, you're also going to be facing inflated taxes relative to someone who's just been hanging around for 30 years. So next slide. So does the city of Pittsburgh, so up until this point, I've talked about a little bit about how failing to tax land value and taxing building value and taxing new construction encourages and subsidizes blight, and it encourages and subsidizes vacant properties. And then this raises a question, is this a problem in Pittsburgh? Do we have a lot of blight and vacant properties? They made this nice dashboard recently, of vacant, condemned, and delinquent parcels. We have 32,000 vacant parcels in the city of Pittsburgh. We have 3,000 condemned parcels, and apparently about 17,000 tax delinquent parcels. Although there's some differing, depending on which data source you use from the official data sources, there's some very differing numbers on how many tax delinquent parcels we have in the city, and we've been unable to reconcile why that difference is. Next slide. This is from 10 years ago, but this is a map of all of the vacant land in the city. And if you zoom in a little bit more, so next slide. Boom, boom, boom. Right. You can see that we have vacant land concentrated. One, we have a fair amount of vacant land in downtown Pittsburgh, where one would hope that we would actually put that to productive use. But we also have a lot of vacant land in some of our poor neighborhoods in the city. And part of that is a result of our poor assessments and our taxing building at a higher rate than we're taxing land. If we were assessing regularly, and thus our millage rates were lower, and if we were taxing land over buildings, the incentives to build here, to create more housing in these neighborhoods, would be much higher, and that would bring some life back into these neighborhoods. Next slide. All right, so I've talked mostly now with anecdotal examples, but what does the actual research say? Well, conveniently enough for us, Pennsylvania legalized municipalities being able to tax buildings and land at separate rates back in 1913 because Pittsburgh heavily lobbied for it. And so in the intervening 100 years or so, about 20 municipalities in Pennsylvania have taken up that offer at one point or another. And this has created a very rich database of what happens when a municipality introduces a land value tax versus when it gets rid of it, and what effect that has on building construction, what effect that has on housing affordability. Ocean Schwab was one of the first papers that studied Pittsburgh's split rate tax and found that we had a relatively high construction rate compared to our peer Rust Belt cities throughout most of the 20th century, partially because of our high land value tax relative to our building tax. And this is why Pittsburgh has a much more densible, walkable feel than, say, Detroit or St. Louis or Cincinnati today. And so it is unfortunate that we chose to get rid of it. Plassman and Tildeman did a little bit of more precise estimate, estimated that Pittsburgh had 3% more building permits when it had split rate tax than it would with a conventional tax, and it would have had 10% more building permits with a solely land value tax. Bansoff and Lavery found that adopting a split rate tax leads to a 5.4 increase in housing units in cities in Pennsylvania. Zhao Yang is a professor at Robert Morris University. She's done a lot of work on land value taxes. She refined B&L's estimates, found that adopting a split rate tax led to an increase, 8.4% increase in housing units in cities in Pennsylvania, and then most recently Murphy and Siegert. A percentage point increase in the implicit land tax is associated with a 1.9% increase in density and a 1.2% increase in population weighted density in our most conservative estimates. Jurisdictions with higher implicit land value taxes see greater growth in earnings, business establishments, within county racial diversity, and within county income diversity. So essentially all of the empirical economics evidence we have on this subject, every single economics paper I've been able to find on the subject finds that yes, the empirical results match what the theory suggests. Shifting the tax onto land results in denser cities, more housing construction, more diversity, lower rents. Fantastic. Next slide. And then, not to leave real estate transfer taxes out, real estate transfer taxes, Dockesdale and Buettner, Dockesdale 2012, Buettner 2017, both used natural experiments where municipalities adopted real estate transfer taxes or increased their real estate transfer taxes. Dockesdale's in Toronto, Buettner's in Germany, and both found that increasing the real estate transfer tax has substantial deadweight losses. It causes a reduction in the number of sales, it causes a reduction in the amount of construction, and that the deadweight loss relative to the amount of tax revenue raised is massive. Much larger than a property tax. Buettner's was 67 cents for every euro of revenue raised. So that means for every dollar of tax actually collected, you've just destroyed 67 cents worth of value. Next slide. All right, so I keep mentioning that Pittsburgh had a land value tax and we got rid of it. What happened? 1913, Pittsburgh successfully lobbies Pennsylvania and we get the right to have a split rate tax. This is at the height of the Georgia progressive movement, the land value tax movement. And so over the 12 years, we do a gradual transition from 1-to-1 to 2-to-1 ratio on tax on land to building value. That gradual transition is why it's called the graded tax. For about 30 years, from 1913 to about 1942, Pittsburgh had arguably some of the best property tax assessments in the country. We had a permanent team of assessors hired by the city of Pittsburgh, about 40 people working with slide rules and pencil and paper, and they assessed every single property in the city of Pittsburgh every 3 years. In 1942, the transfer of that responsibility for assessments from the city of Pittsburgh to the county of Allegheny went into effect. The county was then responsible for assessing every single property every 3 years, which they continued to do. In 1979, they increased the land tax from a 2-to-1 to a 5-to-1 ratio. Mayor Caligari in 1985 was very strongly opposed to the land value tax, but basically everyone else in Pittsburgh was still very strongly in favor of it. So they raised the land tax some more in 1989. Then but separate to all of this, in the 1970s, there was a court case in Pennsylvania that ruled that assessing every property once every 3 years, assessing a third of the county each year, violated the uniformity clause of Pennsylvania's Constitution, because in any given year that meant you were taxing 1/3 of the county at a slightly different rate than the other 2/3. And so in the 1970s, there was a court case that said, hey, you can't do that anymore. Counties, you have to either reassess everything all at once or never again. And basically every single county in Pennsylvania said, oh, thank God, we are never doing reassessments ever again. Westmoreland County has not done a reassessment since 1972. So Allegheny County stopped doing reassessments. They got sued in the mid-90s about over this. And their immediate response to being sued was to freeze all assessments and fire the entire staff of assessors. I think it was the school board at this point. I think it's always been the Pittsburgh Public School District that ends up suing the county to force reassessments because they have, because the school district is largely capped at how much it can raise taxes. And so if the assessments aren't going up and it's already at its cap on where it can raise taxes, that means that in real terms, its budget's going down, and eventually that becomes untenable. And the only thing they can do at that point is sue the county to force reassessments, which they're currently actively doing right now again. They do this like every 15, 20 years. So they, first time they're doing this in the mid-90s, Allegheny County's commissioners respond by just trying to buckle down and freeze assessments and firing all of the assessors. This doesn't work. They're ruled against almost immediately and orders new assessments to be carried out. But since they just fired all of the assessors, they have to hire a private firm to do so. They hire Sabre Systems of Ohio. They hire Sabre System Services of Ohio to carry out the new assessments. It takes them about 3 years. When these new assessments come out, they issue some misleading initial assessments in 2000, and towards the end of the year, the city of Pittsburgh bases its budget on those new assessments. But in January, when the final assessment results are released and resulting in some extreme tax increases and a lot of disagreement about how those assessments are, two crucial things happened. One, we paid them $25 million for their good work. And then the second thing is that City Council decided that we should put a temporary pause on our split rate tax. We should revert to a conventional flat rate tax until we get this whole assessments thing figured out 25 years ago. All right, so for the next 8 years, they continue to not do any new assessments. And so the school board sues again, and a court orders new assessments in 2009. It again takes 3 years to do. This time we hired Tyler Technologies to do it based on Sabre Systems' previous assessments. Those are the current assessments that we have. They came out in 2012. We paid them $8 million for their good work. And then 2018, the city, feeling the tight pinch from the lack of property tax revenue, decides that it's going to raise the real estate transfer tax, and they do so from 2% to 2.5% in 2018, and then again from 2.5% to 3% in 2020, which I've actually started work on a paper using this as a nice natural experiment to see what the deadweight loss is, because they changed the real estate transfer tax, but the surrounding municipalities in Allegheny County did not. And since so many neighborhoods in Pittsburgh lie right on that city of Pittsburgh random other municipality border, it provides a really nice natural experiment. So from an academic perspective, great that they did that. From a quality of the life in the city of Pittsburgh, not so much. And then 2024, the county raised the property tax millage because they had still not done any assessments and they were feeling the pinch. And in 2025, the city and school board followed suit. The school board sued the county either last year or the year before. That's currently going through the courts. And based upon the last 2 times they did this, they are almost certainly going to win, and we are almost certainly going to get new assessments in the next couple of years. Hopefully this time, though, instead of hiring an outside firm and paying them millions of dollars to do it poorly, we do a better job of it. Next slide.
It would have been cool if the county exec did something.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. The county exec can order new assessments at any time. That does not have to wait on state legislation, does not have to wait on county council legislation. The county executive has it in her power, if she so chooses, to issue an order to start doing reassessments at any point. She is the only person who has this power.
She promised to do so.
And it was a campaign promise for hers in 2023 to do so. And the fact that she did not do so in 2024 seems that it is unlikely that she's going to attempt to do so during her term, because that was, if you're going to do something as politically unpopular as new assessments, you do so in the very first year of your term. So you've got like 3 or 4 years to sort of work your way back up. All right. How did people feel, though, about land value taxes back in the day? This is Mayor William McGee back in 1915 saying, "The unearned increment, the profit of the landowner who becomes rich through growth of the community without effort on his own part, I am frankly opposed to him. He is a parasite on the body politic." That sort of represents the views at large at the time. They were strongly in favor of land value tax. Formerly land in 1927, land held vacant here was touched lightly by taxation, even as it was being greatly enhanced in value by building around it, the builders being forced to pay the chief toll, almost as though being fined for adding to the wealth of the community. Now the builders in Pittsburgh are encouraged. Improvements are taxed just 1/2 the rate levied upon vacant land. Building has increased accordingly. And then in 1966, it is the homeowner who emerges as the chief beneficiary of the graded tax. This is widely recognized as one of the principal reasons why this plan has popular support. Only in rare instances do we find a homeowner paying a higher tax under the graded tax. The typical homeowner's investment is largely in building rather than land, it being quite common for the assessed value of the house to be as much as 5 times the value of the site, and often this ratio is exceeded. And this remains true in the city of Pittsburgh. In most neighborhoods, the value of the building itself is much higher than the land it sits on. The rare exceptions are in our most desirable neighborhoods, like Squirrel Hill, like parts of Shadyside, like parts of Oakland. Next slide. All right. How did we feel about assessments at the time? They were common, they were accurate, they were carried out by the Pittsburgh Board of Assessors, carried out every 3 years. Between 1922 and 1942, the city of Pittsburgh succeeded in establishing a fairly high standard of evaluation for both land and buildings. Once we merged, though, with the county, and then once that 1970 court case happened, Pennsylvania has no mandatory requirement for periodic reevaluation, meaning that as a practical matter, no county spends the time in political currency to reassess properties unless a lawsuit compels them to do so. That quote's from 2012. It should be noted that the next year, Philadelphia in 2013 committed to doing regular reassessments and has done so every 3 years since, which means that Pittsburgh is and 49 out of 50 states mandate regular periodic reassessments, which means that Pittsburgh is the largest municipality in the country that does not do regular property tax reassessments. It seems clear from this account so far that the primary cause for the abandonment of the Pittsburgh graded tax was the defective assessment system and the inordinate lapse of time since the last real valuations. New assessments were simply based on previous assessments going back to some arbitrary base year. Not for decades had a real market valuation been carried out prior to 2001, and now we have placed ourselves back in the same situation. It is 2026. We have an arbitrary base year of 2012. We've not had a real market valuation, arguably since the 2001 one. The Tyler Technologies one was based off of the 2001's work. Next one. One of the lessons that perhaps should have been learned was that of the importance of gradualism, that the early founders of the graded tax clearly understood in taking 12 years to move from a ratio of 1:1 to 2:1. All right, so what are the key policy lessons we have been just hammered into us so far from Pittsburgh's previous experience? Do regular assessments. Make sure they're high quality. Tax land at a higher rate than buildings, and when you shift the tax onto land, do so gradually. Once you've done all of that, and as long as you maintain it, it remains popular. If you let the system degrade, if you let the assessments collapse, then it becomes unpopular. Next slide. The property tax punishes modest improvements and rewards steady declines. People who take steps to add value to their property pay more taxes, while those who allow their property to diminish in value pay less. The property tax makes slumlords possible, allowing them to buy distressed properties and ride the cash flow down a slope of decline, paying minimal taxes the entire way. If we want to have a city that actually does not reward blight and does not reward vacant lots, we should shift from property taxes onto land value taxes. Next slide. Okay, so this is now going to be an argument from authority. If all of everything I've said before is true, why have economists not just been shouting this from the rooftops and telling everyone about it? Why is this just not widely known among economists? It is widely known among economists. As Milton Friedman, the 1976 Nobel Prize laureate in economics, said, "In my opinion, the least bad tax is the property tax on the unimproved value of land," the Henry George argument of many, many years ago. William Vickrey, the 1996 Nobel Prize laureate in economics, said the property tax is, economically speaking, a combination of one of the worst taxes, the part that is assessed on real estate improvements on new construction, and one of the best taxes, the tax on land or site value. Now you might go, okay, but could really the officials in the city of Pittsburgh know that economists felt this way? Next slide, please. This is a letter from Herbert Simon, the 1978 Nobel laureate in economics, a long-term resident of Pittsburgh, professor at Carnegie Mellon for about 50 years, lived on Northumberland that whole time, writing directly to the city of Pittsburgh's council and mayor in 1979 when they were discussing whether to raise the wage tax or the land tax. I would like to comment on the recommendation and to express my own view, both as a property owner in the city of Pittsburgh and as an economist who has professional experience with urban problems. Assuming that a tax increase is necessary, it is clearly preferable to impose the additional costs on land by increasing the land tax, rather than to increase the wage tax. The two alternatives open to the city. I recommend strongly that needs for additional revenue be made by increasing the land tax. And then this last paragraph sort of catches why, despite all economists being really strong in favor of this, the city and council and mayor seem to not know about it too much. My teaching schedule at Carnegie Mellon University prevents my personal attendance at the hearings. So in order that my views may be heard, I'm authorizing and requesting J. Craig Kuhn, his city council member, to read this letter aloud and to submit it to council on my behalf. Next slide. In his reasonable defense, Herbert Simon's reasonable defense, they did raise the land tax instead of the wage tax. Okay, but those were just 3 Nobel Prize winning economists. Maybe they were just kooks. What does the entire field think? Recently, November 2nd, 2023, there was a poll of 50 top economists in the US asking, shifting the burden of municipal property taxes towards land and away from improvements such as buildings, as proposed in the recent Detroit land value tax plan, will enhance the incentives for owners to develop their land and thereby give a substantial boost to local economic growth over a 10-year horizon. Do you agree or disagree? And so the responses are 46% agreed, 7% strongly agreed, only 2%, only one guy disagreed. And when you weighted by confidence, the agreement is even stronger. People not only agreed, but were strongly confident. But what did they have to say? Next slide. The sole person who disagreed, Richard Thaler, said, "I understand the potential value for taxied land and its potential value, but its market value is very low. The incentive will also be low, so substantial seems like an overstatement." Essentially, the economics is 100% right, but come on, it's Detroit. What's the difference? And similarly, Richard Smolensky from MIT said, "I agree with the direction of the effect, but choke on substantial." All right, next slide.
Well, can I say also that there's a great talk that the mayor of Detroit gives about implementing this with a lot of like Detroit-specific examples.
Mhm.
It's pretty long, but it's very like gripping because he's talking to people and there's pictures of actual people, actual houses in it.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken though, they didn't actually end up getting permission from Lansing to do it. So, did not. Yeah.
If you were to go from a combined tax back to a split level tax,
Mhm.
what percentage would you want to add to the land as compared to the building? So say you have a property that was 800,000 and you would go to a split, what percentage would you think you'd want land to improve based on this economic model? Like what would be the right allocation? Because you'd have to unwind what you have today.
Right, so
Summarize the question for the. 'Cause you-
oh yes. So the question is, what percentage of the value of a parcel is land versus buildings, right? And that varies heavily dependent upon neighborhood and location. So thinking back to the example of those 2 houses that are essentially identical in construction and year built, but that one is sold for 4 times the value of the other, their building value is probably identical, right? Like if you tore both of those buildings down and then had to physically replace them, it'd probably cost the same amount of money to do so. But the land value for one is probably like $30,000, while the land value for the other is probably closer to about $500,000. So then this raises the question, all right, so if we shift the tax, the land value tax, if we shift the tax burden from land onto buildings, who's going to see their taxes change and how much? And that's what this map is all about. This is divided up by city council district, although the 2010 to 2020 map, and it's color-coded by who would see their taxes go up and who would see their taxes go down. Only 2 districts would see their taxes actually increase. District 8, Erica Strasberger's district, and District 5, Barb Warwick's district, and that's largely because the most valuable land in the city, as I'm sure we are all sort of aware, is basically this big circle right here. So if you are a homeowner in Squirrel Hill North or Shadyside or Shenley Farms, you would almost certainly see your taxes go up substantially. If you are a homeowner in Bon Air, or if you're a homeowner way out on the West End, you'd almost certainly see your taxes go down. Yeah.
Is this based on assessments that were done in a certain year that was in the past?
Yeah, this is based on the 2012 assessments.
Okay.
So take it with a massive grain of salt, because again, our current assessments are very thoroughly garbage.
What about downtown? That seems like it would be still like the pricier land than
The land is pricier, but the building values tend to be relatively high at the moment.
So District 6 combines downtown with like the Hill District and some other.
And also, yeah, this is Lavelle's district, so it divided up by district is not always the best way to highlight this. Although it is useful for knowing which council members are most likely to support it or versus oppose it. On the downtown aspect, property value, building value is a function of what you can either sell or rent it for, and so commercial buildings downtown are largely dependent upon their value is largely dependent upon commercial rents, and since downtown office rents have just been plummeting, we're watching those building values come crashing down, and as long as we keep taxing buildings at the same rate as land, as those values come crashing down and we refuse to do any new reassessments, we're going to have to see the city just keep raising the tax rate. Yeah.
Just curious, is there a benefit to having a split rate tax, economically speaking, or should we go in the long term towards land value tax only?
It's better, split rate tax is better than a flat rate tax, but it's worse than a land value tax. It is solely a political compromise. Like, there's a good paper by Stiglitz from 1977 showing that you can cover all local expenses using solely a land value tax, and it is economically most efficient to do so. Yes.
Let's say that, because downtown there are a lot of former office buildings that are currently being converted into housing. Looking at that as sort of where the future of downtown is to some extent going, how do you?
You're not speaking. Put it back on.
Oh yeah.
How do you think that would interplay with change to a land value tax over time?
So residential rents versus commercial rents tend to be lower per square foot. And if what we're seeing downtown is a shift that is going to remain, if downtown's peak office days are over and will never come back, then we're going to permanently see building value downtown decline. That said, the land value in downtown is still probably going to remain some of the highest in the city, because land value is a function of your location to amenities and how easy it is to get to other things. That's an Alonzo Muth Mills model. And so the two most valuable parts, land areas in Pittsburgh, are likely to remain downtown and this area right here, just because they're close to amenities, easy to get to jobs, easy to get to other things. Their proximity to everything else is what makes them so desirable.
So you've laid out a pretty good argument as to why
Yep.
And you paint a bleak picture if it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And I've lived here for decades, so I've been watching this happen. What is the downside of doing this?
So the downside of doing this is that you're going to see, so the question is, what is the downside of doing? Ooh, we've lost it. Are we back? Question is, what is the downside of doing this? And this being two separate things: one, regular reassessments, and two, land value tax. In both cases, the downside is going to be that property owners who have owned property for a very long time in neighborhoods that have gone up a lot in value and haven't seen either their assessments go up while the market rate of their property has gone up quite a lot, and the land value that they're sitting on has gone up quite a lot, they are going to see higher taxes if we implement this, which is why we should do this gradually and slowly over a period of time, making it very clear that, hey, just so you know, over the next 20 years, your taxes will be going up a lot. And that gives them time to adjust and either decide, you know what, I'm not okay with my taxes going up this much, and I choose to sell and downsize to somewhere else. And that is, from a perspective of housing policy, a good thing, because that would mean that single-family homes in highly desirable areas or smaller buildings in highly desirable areas will likely get redeveloped gradually into buildings with more housing units. That will increase the number of housing units in the most desirable areas of the city, and that will bring down rents and housing costs. From a political perspective, though, that means that that there will be a small contingent of people who live in this area who will be very, very angry about the incoming rise in taxes and will politically do as much as they can to fight it. And there's really no way around that except to sort of meet them head on and say, you know, I understand that you are upset about this, but this action benefits the city as a whole, and you are, objectively speaking, the wealthiest cohort in the city. You are the people who could most afford to take this hit.
I understand that. The question I had was economic downside.
Oh.
Theoretically, what is the downside of this one?
Oh, from an economic theory side, none. It's all gain.
Really?
Yeah, like it's again not Pareto optimal because there are some losers and some winners, but in terms of efficiency and welfare, it's all gain. It's just a reduction in deadweight loss. Yeah. Next slide. All right, so the policy recommendations. 1, county council should pass legislation requiring frequent, fair, regular assessments using open source methods and data. And by data, I mean specifically the parcel details, the commercial rents, and the property sales. And the reason that we should make it open source methods and data is so that if anyone is upset about how their property value is calculated, there is a very easy way for them to challenge it. They can challenge either the data and say, look, you've got my parcel details wrong, or you've got my sales value wrong, or you've got my neighbor's parcel details wrong. Or they can challenge the method and say, I think that the methodology you are using is incorrect, and here is how it should be corrected. And if they are right and we have update the methodology, then everyone's taxes change slightly. On the city side of things, the mayor and city council should credibly announce a plan to shift this tax burden away from buildings and real estate transfer tax onto land. I suggest a very gradual shift over the course of 20 years. And so it would be great if they would pass a resolution saying, here's our plan to do it over the next 20 years, and then just every December, when the mayor sends to the council budget, just updates the millage rate a little bit at a time. And that means that, or do you have a question on that?
Yeah, why is the scale 20 years? Why not 10 or 5? Is it just your personal feeling that would?
That's my personal feeling as I, oh yeah. Why 20 years? Why not 5? Why not 10? Why not 30? So I was playing around with the numbers this past budget season, trying to figure out what would be for like the 95th percentile who would see the highest rise in taxes. What would be that jump in taxes that would be not so terrible? and what's the time horizon that makes that as palatable as possible. And 20 years was where I sort of landed on as this feels like what is most comfortable. It is, the faster we do it, the better economically speaking, but obviously the faster you do it, the worse it is politically. Yeah. All right, next slide. So this is an excerpt from an email I sent to Gitlin, Sarah Annamorato's chief of staff, on what it would cost us to do regular reassessments in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County, instead of hiring a firm to do it. And the very short version of all of this is that if we hire a firm like Value Base to do it and sign like a 10-year contract with them, they can do it for about $400,000 a year. We could do it in-house for a similar amount of money, and over in Research Committee, specifically with the help of Connor Schwartz from Research Committee, who's sitting back there, we've applied the Open Automated Value Methodology Kit from the Center for Land Economics to the existing public databases on property sales and parcel data, and have done our own attempt at reassessments just to sort of give ourselves a sense of what those reassessments would look like. And we estimate roughly that the cost of doing this in-house would mean hiring 2 or 3 employees just to be sifting through and updating the data every year. Right now, out of our 580,000 parcels, assuming about 5 to 10 fields per parcel of relevant data for calculating out the property values, roughly about 10% of those data points, about 580,000 data points, are incorrect and would need to be updated. And that's just going to take a lot of man hours. So we're going to have to hire people to do it. But doing that in-house is much, much cheaper than if we panic hire Tyler Technologies, because as Tyler Technologies quoted us 2 years ago, it would cost them at least, they would charge at least $30 million to do a reassessment. And since we're about to be ordered by a court to do reassessment anyways, if we just choose to do it in-house, or if we choose to hire a firm to do it continuously over the course of 10 and 20 years, and spend on the order of, $500,000 or $400,000 to do it every year, instead of being forced to pay $30 million every 12 to 15 years, then we're saving the county roughly $2 million a year just the cost of doing assessments. It is cheaper to do regular assessments and cheaper to do them in-house than it is to hold off on doing assessments and then panic hire and hire a private firm to do it when the court orders us to do so.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
Real quick. I forgot to do a time check, so I don't know if we want to wrap up with a couple of questions. Or
What time is it now?
Slots. It's 8.
Okay, I've got like 2 or 3 more slides.
I did have one
Sure.
question though. You mentioned that there's like data errors, like reconciling them in-house. Does that require people to physically go look at buildings? And alternatively, paying someone else, is that why it's so expensive? Because like they'll physically go survey buildings, or?
So it varies depending on the data errors. Some of these data errors are stuff like the parcel lot size is just wrong, and that's something that can be fairly easily corrected with just a good, Python script and a GIS map of the city. Some of it is stuff that, you might have to physically go out to the building and check. And yes, that is part of the reason why Tyler Technologies is quoting us so much more, because as they describe how they plan on doing it, is they plan on hiring a whole bunch of people, training them, and then sending them out over the course of 3 or 4 years to check on every single parcel individually in person and completely make the database entirely from scratch. And that is the most expensive way you could possibly choose to do it. Yeah.
So I guess my question is,
Lift the thing out of the box.
so you sounds like you're in favor of doing it in-house, and I know there's a state capacity issue with that. But do you know what's common in municipalities across the country, and with more focus on larger ones the size of Pittsburgh? Is it more common for cities to do this in-house, or to have a private firm do it for them?
Most cities that do this competently do this in-house. Like Chicago does this entirely in-house. The state of Alaska does it entirely in-house, but they have this whole state do the assessments. They don't have individual municipalities do it. The places where it is more common to hire someone to do it is ones that have relatively recently mandated doing reassessments. And my suspicion is that over time, they are going to shift to be doing it more in-house as they realize that it is cheaper to do so. All right, next slide, because we're getting close to the end and we should wrap up soon. All right, so if we want to change these policies, who should we be lobbying about this? Bethany Hallam and Dan Grisbick are the core pro-reassessment council members. They're probably going to introduce legislation this year for regular reassessments. If it's anything like Bethany Hallam's legislation from a couple of years ago, it's probably going to be pretty good. So when that comes out, talk to your local county council members, encourage them to express support for it. On the city council, we need a city council member who's willing to lead the charge on this. Erica Strasburger has said that she understands the economics behind it and is in favor of it, but that she doesn't want to lead the charge on this because, again, her district is the one that would see the highest increase in taxes, and she is not politically suicidal. She didn't use those words, but, you know. And Bob Charlin's very supportive of it, would vote for it immediately if it came up, but is not willing to take the lead. Anthony Coghill claims he doesn't understand it. So I think Kari Mosley would actually be really good. One, District 9 would see some of the largest tax decreases, so politically it would be popular in his district. Jack Wagner is his wife's uncle and was a strong split rate tax supporter, as was his mentor, former council member Sala Udin, who was on city council in 2001 when it was repealed and was the only member of council to vote against the repeal. So I think he's in a place to both understand it, and I think he's in a place where politically he would have the base to support it. Next slide. All right, so the final remarks, last slide. So to end the housing crisis, to bring down rents, to make housing more affordable, to increase mobility into the city of Pittsburgh, to increase migration into the city of Pittsburgh, to have the city that we love, we need to build more housing, specifically in places where people want to live. That means the most expensive neighborhoods in the city need to see more housing construction. That does mean Squirrel Hill. That does mean Shadyside. To help incentivize building more, we should tax land at a higher rate than buildings. We should avoid real estate transfer taxes altogether. We should get rid of them entirely. We should have accurate assessments regularly and frequently. And we should introduce the tax change policy gradually to ease the taxpayer into them. That's all I have. Any more questions? Yes?
When it comes to supply issues, especially in Pittsburgh, I'm curious how this compares to zoning laws, how much this has impact, just at a high level. You know?
So they're complement. Oh yeah.
So either he repeats the question or grab that little box, lift the puck out of it, say your question.
I can just repeat it. How does this compare versus zoning reform? Like which matters more? They're complementary. So if your zoning is so tight that you can't build more no matter what, it doesn't really matter what you do with the land value taxes because you're just not going to get more. But that's also going to mess with the property assessments because if you've zoned it really tightly, that's going to make it so that land value in more desirable places where you can't build more is going to be artificially depressed. Similarly, oppositely, whatever. If you don't have, if you go ahead and do all of the zoning reform, if you upzone the entire city, but you don't make any changes to the taxes, if you leave our assessments not being updated, then there's not going to be a lot of incentive in some of the most desirable areas to build more. And that's going to just act as a huge brake on housing construction. And that's what we saw in the early 1900s in Pittsburgh, which was you had these large landowners in Pittsburgh who had inherited vast amounts of lands, largely from ancestors who had acquired it in the 1790s, who were taxed very little for it, not doing much with it, and just waiting it out. And it was the frustration with their inaction that was a major contributing factor to Pittsburgh being the only city in the United States that ended up adopting a land value tax. Yes.
So if you go with a split value tax,
Hmm.
would that be more palatable for the people living in Squirrel Hill and Shady Side because it wouldn't be quite as aggressive
Yeah.
a change for them while still getting some of the benefit that you seek in all the other areas?
It would be, and while the gradual shift would be happening, it would technically we still have a split rate tax in the sense that both land value and building values millage rates are set independently. We've just set them at the same rate for the past 25 years. But when we do a gradual shift, it would be a split rate tax where we are slowly lowering the building millage and slowly raising the land millage year after year after year.
And do you think that that would be politically more palatable?
Yeah, I think that's politically more palatable, and that's why I'm suggesting a very gradual shift. I think that you should aim for a 100% land value tax in the long run, no matter how long it takes you to get there. If it takes you 20 years, if it takes you 50 years, if it takes you 100 years, you should aim to get all of your tax revenue for the city eventually purely from land value. Yes, Amy.
I feel like we should probably close soon,
Yep.
but is there anywhere like outside of the country where this is like cities where they use purely land value?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, so is there anywhere outside of the United States where land value taxes have been used successfully? The answer is yes, there are many. One of the countries that has done it best is Singapore. Technically what they're doing is ground rent leases instead of land value tax. The concept though is economically the same, except Singapore owns the land and rents it out to people who wants to build on it. The city-state owns the land. Whereas in a land value tax, you buy the land, so there's a private owner to the land, but you're just paying a tax based on the land value. But economically, they are functionally identical. There's been plenty of other places that have done it throughout time and history. The French aristocrats' opposition to it in 1789 was a major contributing factor to the French Revolution. The Germans, when they colonized Tsingtao in China, implemented it, and that was a major reason for Tsingtao's growth relative to a lot of other European colonies in China. When England attempted to do it in 1909, the House of Lords vetoed it, which then resulted in them removing the House of Lords' power to veto budgets. Wow. Yeah. Sure.
The biggest concern I think I would have with land value taxes is that it strikes me as something you would need more state capacity to implement, because if you're assessing property as a whole, if a property sells with the building and the land, it's unambiguous what the total is.
Right.
Whereas if you're just trying to tease out what the land is of that, figuring out what that is in a way that's accurate and fair and consistent seems like a much harder problem to do. So do you have any perspective on like how that is done and the likelihood that you can get to a state capacity point in Allegheny County where that is done well enough that it would be more fair?
Yes. So fortunately, humans have been taxing property in real estate in one form or another for about 3,000, 4,000 years, as far as we can go back. And the methods for doing so have evolved over time and are now pretty well known and are pretty well established. So the methodology for this is relatively straightforward. The city of Pittsburgh did incredibly high quality assessments back in the 1920s and 10s using just 42 people and papers and pencil. With the use of computers and more modern techniques, we can do it fairly easily with about 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 full-time employees. And there's a wide variety of open source automated valuation methods out there. Somewhere in my sources for this, in the appendix slide, we aren't going to go into it, but I've got a link to a working paper that lists many of those methodology. There's also the Center for Land Economics has an entire toolkit called Mass Appraisal for the Masses, which has a bunch of open source tools that you can explore, understand their methodology, and apply to property databases of your choice. So the state capacity is probably one of the easiest things we could ramp up if we choose to do this. And again, we could also just hire a firm that does this well, like ValueBase, to not only do it for like 10 years, but also train 2 or 3 people in this county to do it as well, and then just hand it off to them. And so we could build the state capacity that way. And again, that would cost us about $500,000 a year, more or less.
You
Yes.
mentioned some council members. Do we know how the mayor feels about this?
So when it comes to Mayor Corey O'Connor, my understanding is that he has expressed no opinions on split rate tax one way or another. I am uncertain if he understands the economics behind it. I would not bet strong money that he does. His dad in 2001 was one of the major opponents to the split rate tax when he was city council president and led to its repeal. But that was largely because Bob O'Connor really wanted to be mayor at the time, and Mayor Tom Murphy was a very strong supporter of the split rate tax. So Bob O'Connor took the opposite position and also represented one of the 2 districts that financially the median resident of the district would benefit from the split rate tax being repealed. Yeah. So what Corey O'Connor's opinion on the split rate tax is unknown. However, given the quality of people he's surrounded with himself with, I'm cautiously optimistic. From what I've seen of who he's appointed so far, he's done a good job of surrounding himself with policy wonks. But property taxes are the third rail in local politics and always have been. And we're going to have to push them on this. They're not going to come up with this on their own.
It's like 8:15.
All right.
I think we should.
John, you've got one more question?
If there's time for one more question,
Well,
I'll ask it. But if we need to,
One more question, yeah.
So the one last thought I have is that different land uses and developments have different costs to the city in terms of city services, and not just to the city, but to the school district and other things. And should that be a consideration in what the tax assessments are, rather than just the land? Like if you build something that adds city services costs, should you pay higher taxes to reflect that? Is that economically efficient at all?
Well, so your new construction might have some negative externalities, but does that also come with positive spillovers, right? So like let's say you build a really tall building, and as a result that increases traffic to that area and thus degrades the roads more, right? That's obviously a negative externality, but you've added a really tall building that presumably has like a lot of offices or apartments and provides a lot of positive spillovers. In that case, it's hard to identify which is higher, right? Which of those spillovers, the positive spillover, the negative spillover, is higher, and it's hard to identify how that should be priced. And should we be subsidizing that? Should we be taxing that? Hard to know. So I would advise government to attempt to do things that are easy and straightforward, and you can observe it from the outside well and verify that it works. The more complicated you make your system, the harder it is to do that. Property valuation, land valuation, that is one of the easiest things that we know how to do. And it's something that humans have had thousands of years of practice with it and do it constantly. So that is so I have no issue with us assessing land value. I have no issue with us assessing building value. I struggle to think of anyone who's doing a great job assessing negative or positive spillovers of certain types of buildings versus others. Yeah. So I would advise against it.
Thank you for that perspective.
Yeah. All right. That is everything.
Thanks, Jack.
Thanks. And are we off live now?